In 412 AD, 2 years after the city of Rome was sacked for the first time in 8 centuries, as the rapidly declining Western Roman Empire under the rule of the incompetent Christian Emperor Honorius was struggling immensely with the constant invasion and political strife, a frustrated Roman official named Volsanius complained to a friend of St. Augustine's that he couldn't bring himself to convert to Christianity when the tenets of Christianity seemed so antithetical to the governance of an effective state. He objects, for example, to Christ's admonition that one should turn the other cheek, which he sees as lunacy in the face of the invaders who are pillaging Roman lands. We know this because Augustine's friend, St. Marcellinus, was staying with Volsanius at the time, and was writing to Augustine telling him what he and Volsanius were debating. Concerning the apex of Volsanius' argument, we are told the following, and I'll read this first in Latin and then again in English. Haec ergo omnia ipsi posse jungi aestimat, quaestioni in tantum, ut per Christianos principes Christianam religionem maximax parte servantes tanta Republicae mala evenisse manifestum sit. That is, he thinks that all of these things may be added to the question that with Christian rulers, who for the most part observe the Christian religion, the empire has clearly suffered. Now, I think everyone in the modern digital era has had this experience at least once in your life, where you make a passing remark online or over text, and someone responds to you with pages and pages of counterarguments. But I promise you, no one has had it worse in all of human history than Volsanius. Augustine responds to this not only with his own long letter, but with 22 books published over the span of 13 years, titled De Civitate Dei contra Paganos, that is, the city of God against the pagans. This is a huge work, so we won't be able to talk about everything today, but in the course of this video, I'll discuss the main thrust of the city of God, the style, what city of God actually refers to, Augustine's arguments against Stoicism, and which translation I recommend. Stay tuned. Some philosophical works are designed to demonstrate one singular point, while others attempt more to get you to think about everything differently and change your worldview. The City of God definitely fits more into the latter category. This doesn't mean that it's a very cohesive work, and to the modern reader it feels much more like a loosely bound series of lectures than a well-structured dissertation. But the modus cogitandi is consistent, and the big picture thesis of the work is essentially a wide-ranging defense and clarification of the Christian worldview. Topics for consideration range from being as large as whether or not pagans can truly be virtuous, to as small as whether or not we really ought to believe that there really are one-legged men called monopods that lay prone during the day under the shade of their giant singular foot. Augustine consistently advocates for and uses clear logic and honest argumentation. But this is not your everyday academic inquiry. This is passionate and highly cultured polemics. Let's talk about the style a little bit. Augustine is a highly educated, wealthy upper-class Roman and was raised in Ciceronian rhetoric. Cicero arguably being the greatest rhetorician of all time, who in turn cultivated an already strong rhetorical culture of Rome. That is to say, Augustine was educated as a boy on a 500-year-old educational tradition in a culture that valued that tradition as one of the most important signs of high intellect and class, so he was really good at it. He was also genuinely passionate about the defense of Christianity as a convert in a time where the faith seemed to be in great danger, and he combines his rhetorical prowess with a genuine zeal. He seems absolutely beside himself in the first book, when, as a counter-argument to the notion that the fall of Rome is a punishment from the abandoned Roman gods, he lists countless examples of atrocities being committed to the followers of said gods, even in the height of their faith and dedication. He openly laughs at arguments that he finds ridiculous, like when the Egyptians of the time apparently claimed that they had been tracking the stars for 100,000 years. He employs masterful argumentation, like when he tells the story of the founding of Athens, explains that the men voted to name the city after Poseidon, and the women voted to name the city after Athena, and there was one more woman than there were men, so Athena won the vote. And in anger, Poseidon ravaged the Athenian countryside. As a punishment for angering Poseidon, women lost the right to vote. Augustine derides this pretty strongly. This is the great goddess Athena, who not only doesn't protect the Athenians from Poseidon's anger, but also doesn't protect the women who voted for her from losing their right to vote. His quote here is great. Quae et quanta hinc dici possent, nisi sermo ad alia properaret. Oh, how much we could say here if we didn't have to talk about other things. This is a rhetorical tool known in Latin as praeteritio, a passing over. This is when the speaker says that they are not going to talk about something, generally to the effect that the audience gets the point without the speaker explicitly making it. For example, if you were in an argument about the Industrial Revolution and you said, "Don't even get me started on railroads." Well, in this context, it's actually more effective if you don't get started because it gives the audience the impression that you have a lot to say, but that the main point is obvious, that railroads are objectively horrible, and this would be easily demonstrated if you had the time to do so. In the same way, Augustine's remark induces the audience to understand that this situation of Athena not saving women from losing the right to vote, much less the city itself from natural disaster, is so ridiculous and so captures his point that he wishes he could talk about it more, but he can't. Now, I don't want to give the impression that he is some sort of politician, using sort of slimy oratory to dress up the fact that he doesn't actually believe these things, or that he doesn't have an argument to stand on. Not only is that not true, but Augustine himself disagreed with the notion that rhetoric is just a trick or game of smoke and mirrors. He argued explicitly multiple times that the Christian must use rhetoric to defend truth and virtue from skilled detractors. And if you're wondering where he got that idea from, we find the same argument in Cicero's famous essay De Inventione, which Augustine surely must have read as a young schoolboy. Accordingly, Augustine employs masterful rhetoric in the City of God, and his argumentation is methodical and convincing. I find his Latin to be very enjoyable to read. Before I get any further, you might be wondering why the book is called The City of God. Now, this is a wide-ranging series, but the framework that Augustine uses to discuss all of these topics is by introducing early on two figurative cities, which represent two camps of mankind, the civitas caelestis, the sort of heavenly city, and the civitas terrana, the earthly city. Latin civitas can also mean something like a state or a society, but traditionally the word in this work is translated as city. And these two cities are pointed in opposite directions. That is, the heavenly city is upwards looking, spending all of their thought and energy on God and life after death. The earthly city is downwards looking, spending all of their thought and energy on this present life, whether or not that means a disciplined cultivation of the fields, with your eyes literally looking downwards at your work, or abject hedonism, with a figurative looking downwards at base desires. It's all very earthly and low, and ultimately obsessed with self and not with God. Augustine wants to emphasize that people who are citizens of the earthly city can have redeeming qualities, but he is careful to demonstrate that in the end, these virtues are somewhat empty and insufficient. For example, he says that the Roman Empire was built on discipline, martial prowess, bravery, self-sacrifice, self-control, etc. But the reason most people fostered these virtues within themselves was because it brought them praise and material gain. So instead of being truly virtuous or experiencing real fulfillment, these people were just less animalistic and less degenerate. It's like someone who works really, really hard in finance just because they love being wealthy. They aren't working hard because they love the virtue of discipline. They're working hard for the same reason that a thief steals a painting from a museum. It's just servitude to base animalistic desire. It's still laudable insofar as they are demonstrating self-control and talent, but the end is just as empty. On another level, Augustine criticizes even great classical philosophers like Cato and the Stoics, who don't have the problem with wrong motivation, but still have the problem with an empty end goal. That is, even if you are truly focused on a life of virtue, even if you have a really pure love for truth and self-awareness, and living well and being hardworking and brave and kind and humble, and all of these things, without God, what is virtue? Except perpetua bella cum vitiis, that is, perpetual war against vice, a sort of eternal strife, an eternal struggle within yourself to resist the urge to do the wrong thing, to constantly choose to do the right thing. It's not easy, right? It's a long fought out battle. And this is what the life of the virtuous person is like. So, without God, how is this enjoyable? Augustine explicitly asks, why would we consider ourselves to reach the highest and most supreme possible happiness available to humanity in the midst of raging eternal and internal conflict? The true reward, then, for a life of virtue is not to be found in this life, but in the next, and that is relief and peace. Peace from external threats and peace from internal threats. Both of these can be experienced for a time in this world, but only ever fleetingly. The real, final victory is the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. That is the perfect, highest, supreme happiness and the object of desire for the heavenly city. In Augustine's framework, this is the only logical object to life. That's the big picture of the work. If you want to read it yourself, which I definitely recommend, I advise to at least attempt to do so in Latin. But if you can't, and even if you just want to read the English, I do recommend the Loeb. It's a composite series with several volumes and several people working on it, but the standard of scholarship is really high. The textual edition is good. It's just so nice to be able to look at the Latin on one side, and then if you have a question with something in there, you can just look at the English on the other side, or just look at the English on one side, and if you want to see how Augustine said it in Latin, you can look at the Latin on the other side. If you just want the English translation, which is by far the most cost-effective solution, I recommend the Dodds translation with the introduction from the Catholic mystic Thomas Merton. This is a really interesting edition per se, made by two really fascinating figures in recent church history. But the translation itself is also great. Very beautiful English to match the original beautiful Latin. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked this video. I hope you found it interesting. If you like this kind of content, check out the rest of the channel. Kindly consider subscribing or becoming a supporter on Patreon. And until next time, Farathye Yesunde.